So now I'm going to show you how to make half square triangles, which are, they're basically this shape here. That's the one that we're working on. So go ahead and grab one of fabric B and one of fabric C in the 4-inch squares. So you're going to place your two squares right sides together, and then using a ruler and your pen, you're going to mark the diagonal. I'll just darken that a little bit. Okay. Then go ahead and, if you'd like, just a pin, put a couple of pins in here to keep it from shifting. And we're going to be stitching 1/4 inch away from the diagonal on both sides. So first we're going to stitch down this side, and then we'll stitch down this side at 1/4 inch. So this line here is the line that I marked, and I'm going to keep that line right at the edge of my presser foot, and I'm going to stitch at 1/4 inch. Now I'm going to stitch 1/4 inch away again. Alright, so there you can see my original line that I drew, and then the two lines of stitching 1/4 inch away on each side. Alright, now either with scissors or a rotary blade, you're going to want to cut right down that first diagonal line that you drew. Okay, so then once you've cut it, you can open it out and see that you've made two of the same blocks. So we're going to need 8 in total, so we're going to repeat this process 3 more times. So now I should have 8. So we have done so far this one, we've done all of these ones already. Now what we have left to do are these outer ones. So for that, you're going to want to make your half square triangles out of fabric A and fabric C. For me, this is my fabric A, and this is my fabric C. So I'm going to place them right sides together, and these are again the 4-inch squares. So now you're going to go ahead and use that same method to make the half square triangles out of these stacks as well. All right, so now I have 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I'm gonna place those over on my ironing board to press in a moment. So now I'm just gonna take everything that I have stitched so far and press open all of my seam allowances. All right, so now I have 4 of these little half square triangles, which goes around the outside of in the 4 corners here, and then I've got 8 that are gonna go in the center. So now what we wanna do is trim these down to the proper size. So they should be 3.5 by 3.5, and they may be a little bit, like mine is more like 3 5/8 by 3 5/8. So I'm just gonna trim these down slightly, and you can use your your 3.5 inch piece, or you can use a ruler. And I just kind of line it up so that my corners of my pattern piece fit usually along the diagonal seam that I stitched. All right, so the smaller stack here is the little corner pieces, so I'm going to put those aside for the moment, and we're just going to be dealing with our 8 half square triangles. All right, so you're going to want to place these so that your fabric B is forming a little triangle like this. So make sure that's fabric B in there. And then go ahead and pin those together, right sides together. And you're going to do that with all of these. All right. Now I have 4 of these, and I'm going to stitch together along that, that line there at 1/4 inch. Another thing I find really helpful when I'm doing patchwork is to do continuous stitching. It kind of prevents the edges of your fabric getting accidentally sort of sucked down into the machine. So I'm going to start by just stitching onto some scrap fabric. Now before I cut that, I'm actually going to just keep stitching onto my next piece. So now I can come in and just separate all these. And then you're going to press your seam allowances open. Okay, so now you should have 4 identical pieces. So we're going to take 2 of them and set them aside, and then 2 of them we're going to add to. So grab your 3.5 inch squares of fabric B, and they're going to go just like this. And we're going to create these strips of basically 4 squares. So lay it out how it's going to be, and then you can go ahead and place them right sides together and pin it in place. All right, now I'll take this over to the sewing machine, and we're going to stitch these at 1/4 inch. I'm gonna kind of lay out my whole quilt how it's gonna look. So you should have 2 kind of identical pieces that look like this. I'm gonna take one and flip it upside down, and then you've got your 2 pieces that look like this without the squares on the end, and they're gonna go like this. So we're kind of creating a little star pattern, you see? And then your 6.5 inch square goes in the center. The next thing we want to do is this middle piece. So we'll move these two out of the way and make sure you have your pieces. So the fabric B is on the outside here, and the B triangles are pointed inward. Turn this so that it's right sides together and pin it in place. Okay, so go ahead and stitch those two sides. So I went ahead and pressed open my seam allowances, and now we're going to stitch together our center star. So go ahead and place everything together. Make sure you've got your star formation, and then take the bottom and top strips, and you're gonna fold them down so that it's right sides together, and do your best to match up where the seams are. All right, I went ahead and stitched that together and then pressed my seam allowances open again. So, and I pressed it from both sides to try to get it nice and flat. Now we're gonna do our border. So go ahead and lay out your pattern how you want it. So you're gonna have your D fabric around the edge like this. So I like to kind of place them in the center first so I can make sure I have everything oriented right. So I'm kind of just creating some triangles with it, and then I'll just pull them out like that. And that is everything we need for the top. So the first thing I'll do is take these pieces and flip them over. All right, I'm going to stitch that. While I'm over here, I'm also going to pin a few more things. So I'll pin this long strip. All right, so I have stitched the sides together and I pressed these seam allowances open. And then we have our two strips for the top and bottom, and just make sure you turn it so that the diagonal in the corner goes this way towards the center. If you are like me and your edges are not quite meeting up, you can just trim that off real quick. I think the top is pretty good. Maybe it could be a little bit, take a little bit off here. And then I'll pin that in place. All right, so there it is. There's the whole front of the pillow completed. And the next thing we're gonna do is make our quilt sandwich. So I've just placed the top of my quilt on top of my batting, and I'm just gonna trim it down to size. Then I'll flip it over and take my piece of muslin or quilting cotton and put it on the back side
of my stack and just try to smooth this out as much as you can.
So I'm going to start by just marking the lines that I plan to stitch when I quilt, and I'm going to do diagonal quilting, so I'll do quilting in this direction and then quilting in this direction. But you could just do just verticals or really whatever you want. So I'm going to draw a line in chalk that's just a diagonal across, and then I'll also do a diagonal in this direction. Now, if you have a little foot like this that can attach to your presser foot, that's used to help you mark where to do your next line. So then you don't have to mark every, say, 2-inch line that you plan on stitching. So if you don't though, if you don't have a foot like that, you're gonna wanna just keep marking every 2 inches. So now, once I've marked all my quilting lines, I am just gonna go in and kind of add some safety pins to keep everything from shifting. Okay, so now it's ready to quilt, and in terms of the order, I like to start at one of the center ones and then work my way out. And I'm going to keep stitching. So if I stitch this first one in this direction, the next row will also be in that direction. And I'm going to stitch everything in the same direction. And then I will quilt the other diagonal. So I'll do the same thing, starting in the center and working my way out. And that just works out better if you start in the center.
Before I start quilting, I change my settings so that my needle is centered again, and my stitch length is a little bit longer. It's set to 3 millimeters. To do my next row, I'm inserting the guide foot, and I'm going to slide it over until it's at the 2-inch mark on my machine. If you don't have a mark there, you can just measure over from where your needle is. I'm just going to line up the guide foot with the last row that I stitched. So I'm lining it up here with my first row. And then I'll just stitch, keeping that guide foot lined up with my last row. So I'll do this with every row so that I can continue to stitch parallel lines. Here I'm just stitching using my standard zigzag foot. If you do have a walking foot, that works even better for quilting. It'll help all of your layers of fabric move together evenly.
So I've got my 2 backing pieces, and I'm just going to hem one side of each of these. So I'm just going to fold this over about 1/4 inch and press. So I'll just press one of the long edges. I'll press it at about 1/4 inch. Now you want to go over about 1 inch. Now I'm going to stitch right along this folded line on both of these pieces.
finally time to assemble the pillowcase. Lay out your quilt so that it's right sides facing up, and take one of the back sides of the pillow and lay it down so that it's right sides together with the quilt. And as you can see, mine needed to be trimmed down slightly, so you can always just trim off some of the width of your back piece if it needs to be a little bit smaller. Now take your other back piece and lay it right side facing down, just like this, and the two hemmed sections are going to overlap in the center of the pillow. Now I'll trim this one down to size as well. And then you just want to pin all the way around the exterior of the pillowcase, and we'll stitch all the way around using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. The last step is to use some sort of stitch, like a zigzag stitch or a mock overlock stitch, to finish your seam allowances all the way around the outside of the pillow. Then I clipped my corners, turned the pillow right side out, gave it one last press, and it was done. And here's one more look at that completed pillow. So I hope you were able to use this tutorial to make your own pillow. Happy sewing!